Hi, this is Lisa Medved and my case study on missing Booster Club funds. In this case study, a principal discovers that gate ticket sales proceeds don't reconcile quite with the tickets sold. This situation takes place at George Washington Middle School in a community where the student population and socioeconomic status of families attending this school is declining. In spite of that, parents are still quite active and volunteer to support school activities, especially athletics and gate ticket sales and concessions. Booster Club does have an idea about accountability, so they require or ask that 2 parents cover concession sales and 2 cover ticket sales. Mr. Stevens is a principal at the school. He was appointed 4 years ago and has a great relationship with the staff, students, and parents. He works closely with the PT and Booster Club to fill volunteer positions at these athletic events. He does not have an assistant principal to share administrative responsibilities and relies quite heavily on parents to fill these roles. One day, Mr. Stevens did have an active parent volunteer named Mrs. Bowman come to him and request that the PTA fund her daughter's trip to New York to march with other all-state cheerleaders. Apparently, her daughter is quite talented, tried out for this all-state team, and one of the things they get to do is go march in a parade. Mr. Stevens denied her request, feeling that it wasn't appropriate to fund a trip for an individual student, as that those funds were raised for everyone, or at least the majority of students. I do know that the night in question is the last basketball game of the season, and there were volunteers, including Mrs. Bowman, at the gate and at the concession stands. Mr. Stevens was busy with other supervisory duties, so he was unable to oversee the collection or counting of the money. He was confident, though, that there were pre-numbered tickets used, that an inventory of the concession items was in place, and that there was some sort of accounting sheet expected to be filled out. He did greet a particular spectator named Mr. Dumas, and Mr. Dumas had just gotten paid and paid his admission with a $50 bill. So it was known that a $50 bill at one point was at the gate. At the end of the night, Mr. Stevens first he checked the concession proceeds and everything checked out. Then he checked the ticket proceeds, and there was a note from Mrs. Bowman stating that tickets 78 through 88 had to be discarded because they were torn. The ticket proceeds apparently balanced with the number of tickets sold minus 10 that were reported torn. The total did not reflect the amount that should have included the 10 tickets Mrs. Bowman claimed were torn. Mr. Stevens could not find the $50 bill that he knew was there, which actually was the cost of 10 tickets. So what do I need to know? In the area of accountability and supervision, I need to know who was the other parent at the gate selling tickets, if any. Who were the parents at the concession? Does anyone have any relevant information regarding this situation? Why doesn't Mr. Stevens have an assistant principal? In my city, it seems as though middle schools have at least one, high schools have at least one, if not more. So why doesn't he have that? And then because he doesn't have one, what is the district's expectation for coverage of these extra duties? Is he doing things that he doesn't need to be doing? Or is there some other way to be accomplishing these things? And then while he was in his supervisory role at the event, were the duties he was performing at that time necessary when money was counted, or could those things have been put off till later while he attended to the money? I also need to know in regards to the inconsistency of funds and tickets, why Mrs. Bowman stated that 11 tickets were discarded. In her note, she said 78 to 88, which was actually 11, yet only $50. The cost of 10 tickets appears explained, which probably means that the total was probably $5 over, and that doesn't explain just 10 tickets. I would like to know where the discarded tickets were, and if there's a policy regarding discarded tickets, and if so, did Mrs. Bowman follow that policy? I also would like to know where the $50 bill was that was used to pay for Mr. Dumas's admission. And I just want to note that this item may be unrelated and could be easily explained depending on what I find. So the problem immediately is that money or tickets are unaccounted for in the ticket sales money bag, and we need to know who the person responsible is for the inconsistency or what the explanation is for that. There is a greater problem, bigger, larger problem, a systemic problem, that Mr. Stevens just does not have enough help to properly supervise athletic events. So how does he better address this problem with the lack of help with these extra duties? And further, what policies or procedures could be put in place to prevent theft or misplacement or whatever if it occurred? So my plan of action for solving the immediate problem is if I had the money bags that evening and had discovered the inconsistency, I would postpone the deposit of the money in order to keep everything as is from both the ticket sales and concession and return with the security guard at the school office. And then there, I would determine by looking through the bags, start with the ticket sales money bag to see if a larger bill than a 50 is present in that ticket sales money bag. If it is, it may indicate that that $50 bill was used to make change for that larger bill. If I don't find anything there, I would then look in the concession sales money bag to see if a $50 bill is there. This could be explained as the ticket sales may have needed some smaller bills for cash and exchange that $50 bill for some smaller ones. So either one of those scenarios would explain the $50 bill. I then would secure everything in the safe and further investigate. I would interview parents who were present with Mrs. Bowman selling tickets at the gate and interview parents present selling concession that evening. I would also interview Mrs. Bowman regarding ticket sales, her decision to discard the torn tickets, the number of tickets discarded, and whereabouts of discarded tickets, and the fate of the $50 bill. She happens to know anything about that. If a guilty party is determined with conclusive proof or a confession to have taken the $50, then I would give that person an opportunity to pay back the money, and then I'll ask the guilty party not to volunteer for any more situations involving the handling of money. For the larger problem, I would discuss the need for additional staff or administration at the district level. I would examine Mr. Stevens' duties at the athletic events to determine if he's able to rearrange anything in order to be available for those crucial times when money is counted or other things. And I would check to see if policies involving the ticket and concession sales may need to be reevaluated. So the appropriate strategies I use during this plan of action is to always have another person present when counting money or dealing with tickets or any of the other relevant documentation related to this situation. I would interview parents and especially Mrs. Bowman with care and without accusation or causing alarm. Mrs. Bowman has been a long volunteer at the school, and it's appropriate that that would be handled that way. If a guilty party is identified, grace and confidentiality in that situation is appropriate and necessary. Additional strategies to address at the district level is I would make an appointment with the superintendent, board president, or whoever I need to talk about extra funding or help with extra duties, even if it requires a district level administrator to come help. I also would work with the PTA Booster Club to evaluate and change any policies related to the handling of money. Again, very tactfully, because Mr. Stevens, as well as many principals, rely on the help of parent volunteers. And so we do not want to have that taken the wrong way. So resolving this issue by keeping the success of all students in mind. What did I do that was best for students, and the data I have included underneath each example. So by securing funds and finding missing funds, this is important for student success. These funds would have gone to PTA or Booster Club, which generally uses to, according to the case studies, support projects that would benefit all of the majority of students. So loss of funds impacts student success. It is best for all students that I treat everyone involved with respect and without accusation in fact-finding interviews. First of all, alienating the parent volunteers that you rely on in a declining enrollment will only make this situation worse. And then without the volunteers, the athletic and cheerleading activities will suffer, and so the students will also suffer. Finally, Mr. Stevens already has a great reputation, and that good reputation in and of itself is vital to student success. So damaging that relationship would be detrimental to student success. Determining a better way for Mr. Stevens to cover the extra duties. Again, if he's able to supervise, then the loss of funds will not happen, and therefore student success will not be affected. Also, Mr. Stevens may be able to take on some other student-related matters that might positively affect student success. As I was going through this, I was thinking, I had feelings for Mrs. Bowman. I had sympathy for her situation, wanting what's best for her daughter, a lack of funds. I had concern for Mr. Stevens that his workload was way too much, that he had a lack of help. I had a concern that there was even an appearance of loss of funds or misuse, mishandling, and I always want to avoid that. And then I really value the truth, so I wanted to find out what happened. Some unresolved issues I determined mostly did revolve around the cheerleading. Going back to Mrs. Bowman and her request, I wanted to know a little more about this. Did the young lady go to the cheerleading tryout on her own? Was it school sponsored? Was it a coach recommendation? Some of those answers may indicate that some funding might be appropriate. The New York trip funding request in of itself, I wondered why Mrs. Bowman asked Mr. Stevens for the funds and not go to PTA and the Booster Club presidents. Is he filling more than just an advisory role? Because if that's the case, that's not appropriate. And the funding need was still there. So, at the very least, it seems as though Mr. Stevens could say, we can certainly, promote that, get the word out, that type of thing to help you. So how was I effective and efficient management of this, or how did I show efficient and effective management of the school? Well, I counted funds in the presence of another adult, reconciling reports with actual funds, and reevaluating policies and procedures when necessary. How did I promote social learning of every student? It's important that kids know that funds are spent appropriately and on those to whom it was intended. My concern for honesty and truth in determining the cause of the inconsistency is important for social learning. Treating others with respect and grace in all these situations, as suggested for the fact-finding, those families will go home and talk, and knowing how the principal interacted with their families is going to affect them and how they interact socially. And then I think seeing the principal greeting others in a friendly way outside of school at extracurricular activities is essential. It's important to make those relationships with families. And how did I promote the student academic learning? Maintaining a positive relationship with parents, students, and staff. Again, I said this earlier, it is essential, and it positively impacts student success when you have a good relationship with your administrators and your teachers. So that is the first. Securing the funds raised by the PTA was possibly going to be used to supplement academic programs, or could be. Anytime you can secure funds for academic programs, that's important for student success. And then honestly, I am a strong believer that student involvement in extracurricular activities goes hand in hand with academics. So striving to sustain that athletic program, even with limited help, I think shows that promoting academic learning even through athletics. So that is the end of my case study. I thank you very much for listening. I thank you very much for this semester. I enjoyed being part of this class. I have already used what I have learned in discussions with our PTO president, with our administrators, with my colleagues, and I will continue to do so. Thank you so much.